I'll work forever, I swear. Just don't let them sell my daughter. The widow begged the giant mountain man. In a town where power is sold in backrooms and debts are paid with chains, one man's quiet vow stops the crowd cold. He didn't ask questions. He didn't name a price. But the oath he made that morning will drag hidden truths into the open, and not everyone will survive the reckoning. When promises are broken and the law looks the other way, who will stand beside a mother with nothing left but her child, and a man who swore to protect her with his life? Your reactions reaffirm something simple yet powerful, that stories still shape us, even in silence. If you believe in the soft endurance of love, truth, and doing what's right, then you're exactly why these stories exist. The autumn wind whistled through Pine Hollow's town square, rustling the yellowing leaves that skittered across worn wooden boardwalks. Martha Ellsworth's fingers trembled as they gripped her daughter Clara's small hand. The morning sun cast long shadows across the gathering crowd, their whispers sharp as thorns in the crisp air. Jasper Creedy stood on the bank's front steps, his polished boots gleaming. The foreclosure notice crackled in his manicured hands as he cleared his throat. His voice rang out, each word precise and cutting. By order of the Pine Hollow Savings and Loan, the Ellsworth property and all assets therein are hereby forfeit due to non-payment of debts totaling $342. Clara pressed closer to her mother's side, her 12-year-old frame shaking. Martha's worn shawl offered little protection against the chill, or the stares of their neighbors. Furthermore, Creedy continued, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth, in accordance with territorial law, minor dependents without means of support may be placed into indentured service to satisfy outstanding obligations. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Martha's grip on Clara's hand tightened until her knuckles showed white. "Please," she whispered, though whether to Creedy or to God, none could say. "She's all I have left." Creedy folded the notice with deliberate care. "The law is the law, Mrs. Ellsworth. Unless payment is rendered by sundown, arrangements will be made for the girl's placement." The townsfolk shifted uncomfortably, eyes downcast. Some mothers pulled their own children closer. Others muttered prayers under their breath. But none stepped forward. Then came the sound of heavy boots on wooden planks. The crowd parted like water around a stone as Elias Brandt approached. His massive frame cast a shadow that reached all the way to Creedy's feet. Trail dust coated his worn clothes, and his hands bore the calluses of endless labor. "I'll pay it." Elias's voice was quiet, but carried across the square like thunder over distant hills. Creedy's eyebrows rose. "You, Brandt? And how does a mountain man propose to produce such a sum?" "With work." Elias planted his feet firmly. "I'll take on the debt, every penny of it." "And if it takes years?" Creedy's tone dripped with mockery. "Then I'll work years." Elias's gaze never wavered. "If it takes forever, I'll work forever." Clara looked up at the giant of a man, wonder replacing fear in her young eyes. Martha's hand flew to her throat, torn between hope and horror at such a sacrifice. Creedy's laugh cut through the morning air. "Forever, you say? Well, now, that's an interesting proposition." He descended the steps, circling Elias like a wolf sizing up prey. "A man of your capabilities could be quite useful. Very well, I accept your oath of service." He produced a contract from his coat with suspicious speed, as if he'd been waiting for just such an opportunity. "Sign here, Brandt. Bind yourself to work off the Ellsworth debt. Every hour will be counted, every penny logged." His voice dropped lower. "Forever is a very long time." Elias took the offered pen without hesitation. His signature was rough but clear, like the man himself. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Creedy added his own flourishing name below. "The debt transfers to you, effective immediately," Creedy announced, folding the contract away. "Report to the lumber camp at dawn tomorrow. And Mrs. Ellsworth?" His smile showed too many teeth. "Consider yourself fortunate in your champion." Elias turned to Martha and Clara, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Ma'am, little miss." He offered his arm with surprising gentleness. "Let me see you home." Martha hesitated only a moment before accepting, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Clara slipped her free hand into Elias's calloused palm without fear, looking up at him with pure trust. The crowd parted once more as Elias led them away from the square, his steady stride matching their shorter steps. Behind them, Creedy's voice carried on the wind. "Dawn tomorrow, Brant. Don't be late." They walked in silence, their shadows stretching before them on the dusty street. 3 figures joined by circumstance and sacrifice, their futures now bound together by a mountain man's solemn oath and a banker's cruel bargain. The Ellsworth cabin sat humble against the darkening sky, its weathered logs glowing orange in the setting sun. Inside, Martha stirred a pot of bean soup, while Clara set their worn tin plates on the rough-hewn table. Elias ducked his head to enter through the low doorframe, his massive shoulders filling the small space. "It ain't much," Martha apologized, ladling the steaming soup into bowls. "But you're welcome to share what we have." "Much obliged," Elias replied softly, folding himself onto a bench that creaked under his weight. Clara passed him a piece of cornbread, her small hands careful and precise. The lamp's flame cast dancing shadows as they ate in silence. Finally, Martha spoke, her voice tight with emotion. "My Thomas. He passed last winter. Pneumonia took him quick, leaving debts I didn't even know about." Elias listened, his spoon moving steadily through his soup. "The bank gave me a loan," Martha continued, twisting her apron in her lap. $300, they said, to keep the property. But the payments kept growing. Interest, fees, numbers that didn't make sense. She shook her head. "Every month, more demands. Until today. Creedy's good at numbers that don't add up," Elias observed quietly. Clara looked up from her bowl. "Papa taught me figures. I tried to help Mama check the ledger, but Mr. Creedy's writing was awful hard to read." The night deepened outside as they finished their meal. Elias stood, his head nearly brushing the ceiling. "Best get some rest. Dawn comes early at the timber camp." "Mr. Brant?" Clara's voice was small but clear. "Thank you for helping us." His weathered face softened for just a moment. "Sleep well, little miss." Morning mist still clung to the pines when Elias reported to the timber camp. The foreman, a burly man with tobacco-stained teeth, looked him up and down with undisguised contempt. "Creedy says you're working off debt." He spat a brown stream into the dirt. "Top crew needs a setter. Try not to get yourself killed. Paperwork's a real bother." The work was treacherous. Elias scrambled between massive logs, setting chains and hooks for the steam donkey engine that dragged timber down the mountainside. Other men worked with practiced precision, but none called warnings when logs shifted or chains snapped. Twice, Elias barely dodged death by inches. By midday, his hands were bleeding despite his calluses. The foreman watched from the shade, making marks in his notebook with exaggerated care. Every hour would be counted, just as Creedy promised. The morning sun had barely burned away the fog when Martha and Clara made their way to Anita Yazzy's weaving shop. The small adobe building stood apart from the other stores, its window displaying intricate blankets in rich reds and blacks. A bell tinkled as they entered. Anita looked up from her loom, her dark eyes sharp and knowing. "Martha Ellsworth," she said, rising gracefully. "I heard about yesterday's trouble." Martha's cheeks flushed. "News travels fast in Pine Hollow." "Sit." Anita gestured to a wooden bench. "Clara, would you like to see how the wool is carded?" While Clara watched in fascination as Anita demonstrated the wool combing tools, Martha explained her situation. "I'm looking for any work I can find. My hands are strong, and I learn quick." Anita's fingers moved steadily through the wool. "I could use help with washing and dyeing. But Martha, there's something you should know about frontier property laws." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "My husband worked as an agency clerk before he passed. I learned much about legal documents, and about men like Creedy. Martha leaned forward. What do you mean? Territory law has strict rules about widows' rights and homestead claims. Anita's voice lowered. And about how debts can be transferred? That contract your mountain man signed, it might not be as binding as Creedy claims? But Elias swore an oath. Martha protested. Oaths matter, Anita agreed, but so do proper papers. Has anyone besides Creedy seen the original loan documents? Martha's hand stilled in her lap. Number, he keeps everything in his office at the bank. Interesting. Anita's eyes met Martha's. Very interesting indeed. Clara looked up from the wool, her young face serious. Mama, if Mr. Creedy lied about the papers, does that mean Mr. Brandt doesn't have to work forever? Martha stared at her daughter, the morning sun streaming through the shop window, illuminating the dust motes between them. The weight of possibility and responsibility settled on her shoulders like a physical thing. If Anita was right, Elias's sacrifice might not be the salvation they thought it was. But challenging Creedy meant risking everything all over again. In the distance, they heard the steam donkey's whistle echo from the timber camp, marking another hour of Elias's endless debt. Chapter 3. The afternoon sun beat mercilessly on the mountainside as Elias swung his axe. Each strike sent shockwaves through his arms, but he kept his rhythm steady. Sweat dripped from his brow, stinging the cuts on his face from the morning's close calls with falling branches. Timber! The warning cry echoed across the slope. Elias stepped back as another massive pine crashed down, its branches snapping like gunshots. His hands, raw and blistering despite his calluses, gripped the axe handle tighter. The foreman's whistle pierced the air. No rest allowed, not even to catch his breath. Hours passed like molasses. His shirt, soaked through with sweat and blood from where the rough bark had scraped his back, clung to his skin. But Elias never slowed. Each swing of the axe was for Clara's future, each fallen tree another day of her freedom secured. As the sun dipped towards the horizon, Anita's shop glowed with lamplight. Martha sat at the small table, her fingers wrapped around a cup of pine needle tea. These records go back 5 years, Anita said, spreading weathered papers across the table. See here? 3 other widows lost their lands to Creedy's bank. Each time, the original deeds vanished. Martha's hand trembled as she set down her cup. How does he get away with it? He knows which papers to lose, Anita replied, her voice tight with old anger. Which officials to befriend, but the county keeps copies of everything. She tapped the documents meaningfully. We just need to find them. The setting sun painted the cabin's walls golden when Elias trudged up the path. Clara sat on the porch steps, needle and thread in hand. Her face brightened at his approach. Your shirt's torn something awful, Mr. Brandt, she said, holding up a small square of fabric. I can fix it if you'd like. Elias looked down at the child, her small fingers already threading the needle with practiced care. Something shifted in his chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. That's right kind of you, Miss Clara. Inside, Martha stirred the stew pot while Clara perched on a stool, carefully stitching the patch onto Elias's spare shirt. Her tongue poked out slightly as she concentrated on making the stitches even and small. Papa taught me to sew straight lines, she explained, not looking up from her work. He said a crooked stitch is like a crooked promise. It won't hold when you need it most. Elias watched her work, remembering another small pair of hands from long ago. Your papa taught you well, he said softly. The evening meal was simple, bean stew and the last of the cornbread. But the cabin felt warmer somehow. Clara proudly presented the mended shirt, and Elias handled it like fine silk, examining each careful stitch with genuine appreciation. After supper, Martha and Elias sat on the porch steps while Clara played in the yard. She had made a doll from corn husks and scraps of fabric, singing quietly to it as she rocked it in her arms. The sunset painted the clouds pink and gold, but neither adult noticed the beauty. Their thoughts were heavy with worries they dared not speak aloud. Martha watched her daughter, her heart aching. She's so much like her father. Same gentle spirit. Elias nodded, his massive frame somehow gentle in the fading light. His hands, raw and swollen from the day's labor, rested on his knees. The patch Clara had sewn was visible on his shirt sleeve, a small square of lighter fabric that somehow made the whole garment look less worn. Clara's voice drifted over to them as she told her corn-husk doll a story about brave knights and kind giants. The simple trust in her eyes when she glanced their way made Elias's throat tight. This child, who had already lost so much, still believed in goodness, still took the time to sew straight stitches and make up happy endings. Martha's hands twisted in her apron. She wanted to tell Elias about Anita's discoveries, about the missing deeds and the other widows, but the words stuck in her throat. This man had already pledged his freedom for them. How could she burden him with more? The evening grew cooler, and crickets began their nightly chorus. Clara yawned, clutching her doll close. Neither Martha nor Elias spoke of their fears, of broken bodies in timber camps, of lost homes and stolen futures. Instead, they watched this precious moment of childhood innocence play out before them, each silently vowing to protect it at any cost. Clara's kindness with the shirt patch had done more than mend fabric. It had sewn something deeper, a connection, a reason to fight beyond mere duty or obligation. Elias felt it in his aching bones. This wasn't just about paying a debt anymore. It was about preserving that gentle spirit that could find beauty in straight stitches and corn-husk dolls. The last rays of sunlight faded from the yard where Clara played, casting long shadows across her small figure as she whispered secrets to her doll. Dawn painted the eastern sky in soft pinks as Martha and Anita loaded the wagon. Their breath formed small clouds in the crisp morning air. Martha adjusted her shawl, watching Elias disappear into the tree line, heading toward another day at the timber camp. "We should reach the county seat by midday," Anita said, checking the harness on her sturdy bay horse. Her dark eyes scanned the horizon where the sun was just beginning to peek over the distant mountains. "The clerk's office closes at sunset." The wagon creaked as they set out, wooden wheels finding every rut in the rough trail. Martha clutched a small leather pouch containing what remained of her husband's papers. The morning chill seeped through her wool skirt as they bounced along the uneven path. "The territory office keeps copies of everything," Anita explained, handling the reins with practiced ease. "Even if Creedy destroyed the originals, there will be traces." Miles away at the timber camp, Elias worked the high slopes where fresh pines waited for harvest. The morning fog still clung to the mountainside as he checked his climbing harness, a simple affair of leather straps and iron buckles. Something felt wrong with the way it sat against his hip, but the foreman was already shouting for him to get moving. The wagon jolted over another bump, making Martha wince. "Tell me again about the other widows," she said, trying to distract herself from the endless jarring of the road. "3 in the past 2 years," Anita replied, her voice tight with remembered anger. Each time, Creedy claimed their deeds were invalid. Each time, the women had no choice but to leave. She clicked her tongue at the horse as they approached a steep incline. But they didn't have copies in the territory office like we do now. Back at the timber camp, Elias reached for his next handhold in the towering pine. 50 feet up, the wind caught his coat as he secured his harness to a sturdy branch. The leather creaked ominously. He paused, testing the straps again. The sound of splitting leather was his only warning. Elias lunged for the trunk as the harness gave way. His massive hands found purchase on the rough bark, but momentum slammed him hard against the tree. Pain exploded in his right shoulder as he slid several feet before managing to wedge his boots against a thick branch. For a long moment, he hung there, heart pounding, the useless harness dangling below. Blood trickled down his arm where the bark had torn through his shirt. Looking up, he could see where the leather had been partially cut, a clean slice that nature hadn't made. The county seat came into view just past noon, a cluster of wooden buildings dominated by the two-story courthouse. Martha's legs were numb from the long ride as Anita helped her down from the wagon. They climbed the courthouse steps, their boots echoing on the wooden planks. Inside, the clerk's office smelled of dust and old paper. A thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles looked up from his ledger. "May I help you, ladies?" "We need to see the loan records for the Ellsworth property," Anita stated firmly, placing her interpreter's badge on the desk. "And the original survey maps." The clerk hesitated, glancing between them. "That might take some time to locate." "We'll wait," Martha said quietly, but with steel in her voice. Hours passed as they pored over the documents the clerk reluctantly produced. Martha's hands trembled as she compared the papers to her husband's copies. "Look here," she whispered to Anita. "The boundary lines are different, and these signatures—" She traced the uneven ink marks. "These aren't my husband's." Anita nodded grimly. "The dates don't match either. See how the ink changes color on these numbers?" The afternoon light was fading when the clerk approached their table. He glanced nervously at the door before leaning close to Martha. "Mom," he whispered, "you didn't hear this from me, but there's railroad men been asking about properties along Pine Creek, particularly yours." He straightened quickly as footsteps approached from the hallway. Martha's heart pounded as she gathered the papers with trembling hands. The pieces were falling into place: Creedy's sudden interest in their small farm, the impossible loan terms, the forged documents. This wasn't just about their land anymore. The setting sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Martha and Anita loaded the wagon for the long journey home. Martha's mind raced with all they'd discovered: the missing signatures, the altered boundaries, the railroad's secret interest. But her thoughts kept returning to Elias, working alone in the timber camp where accidents seemed all too convenient. The wagon wheels creaked as they started the long ride home through the gathering dusk. Martha clutched her shawl tighter, the proof of Creedy's fraud secure in her pocket, but her victory felt hollow, knowing what might await them back in Pine Hollow. The wagon rolled into Pine Hollow well past midnight, the moon casting silver shadows across the empty streets. Martha's bones ached from the long journey as Anita helped her down from the seat. They parted with whispered promises to meet the next day, both women knowing sleep would be hard to find with their discoveries weighing heavy on their minds. Dawn broke crisp and clear the next morning as Martha packed a basket with fresh biscuits and salt pork. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped the food in a clean cloth, thinking of the documents hidden beneath the loose floorboard in her cabin. Clara still slept soundly in her small bed as Martha slipped out into the misty morning. The timber camp's bunkhouse stood at the edge of the clearing, a crude structure of rough-hewn logs that leaked warmth through its many gaps. Inside, Martha found Elias sitting on his narrow bunk, struggling to pull on his boots. Even in the dim light, she could see the dark bruises spreading across his ribs where his shirt hung open. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, but accepted the basket she offered. Martha perched on the edge of a wooden crate, her skirts gathering dust. "The loan papers were forged, Elias. The boundaries were changed, signatures falsified." She kept her voice low, though the other workers had already headed out. "The railroad wants our land." Elias listened as he ate, his face growing darker with each detail she shared. When she finished, he stood, ignoring the way pain tightened his features. "Don't matter none. I gave my word to work, and that's what I'll do." He reached for his axe. "Clara needs protecting more than ever now. But your injuries, I'll manage." His tone was gentle but firm. "You focus on gathering proof. I'll keep working so Creedy don't suspect nothing's changed." The morning sun had barely cleared the trees when Reverend Dunbar's familiar figure appeared at Martha's cabin door. His grey hair caught the light as he removed his hat, waiting patiently while she invited him inside. "I've been praying about your situation, Mrs. Ellsworth," he said, settling into the offered chair. "The Lord moves in mysterious ways, but he also expects us to act when we witness injustice. Martha's hands twisted in her apron. "It's worse than we thought, Reverend. The papers dash. I suspected as much. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I've seen Creedy's pattern before, in other towns, but this time we have a chance to stop it. Judge Harrison arrives for circuit court next week." Hope flickered in Martha's chest. "The federal judge?" "The very same. A man known for his particular distaste for railroad corruption." The Reverend's eyes held a determined glint. "I can help gather support, quietly. There are others in town who've lost land to Creedy's schemes, though they're afraid to speak up." At Anita's weaving shop, Clara sat cross-legged on a colourful blanket, watching the older woman's skilled hands guide wool through the loom. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching dust motes that danced above the wooden frame. "Each pattern tells a story," Anita explained, pointing to the intricate design taking shape. "This one speaks of balance and harmony." She guided Clara's small hands to feel the texture of the weaving. Sometimes the strongest patterns come from threads that seem different at first. Clara's fingers traced the design carefully. "Like how you and Mama are different, but working together?" Anita's eyes crinkled with warmth. "Exactly like that, little one." As afternoon shadows lengthened, Martha joined Anita and Reverend Dunbar in the back room of the weaving shop. They spoke in hushed tones, spreading the county documents across a work table while Clara continued practicing at the loom in the front room. "Judge Harrison will need more than just altered papers," Reverend Dunbar cautioned, adjusting his spectacles. "He'll want witnesses." Anita nodded grimly. "I can bring 2 other widows who lost land. They're scared, but they'll testify if they know the judge will protect them." "And the clerk?" Martha asked, his whispered warning about the railroad. "Too risky to count on him," Anita cut in. "But I have maps from my late husband's survey work. They show the original boundaries before Creedy started changing them." The Reverend pulled out a small notebook, making careful notes. "We have 1 week to gather everything. We'll need to move carefully. Creedy has eyes everywhere in town." Martha glanced toward the front room, where Clara's quiet humming mixed with the rhythmic click of the loom. "And Elias. He's putting himself at risk every day in that camp. The Lord watches over those who stand for justice," Reverend Dunbar said softly. "But we'll need to work fast. 1 week to build our case, then everything changes." They worked until dusk, outlining their plan in whispers, each adding their piece to the growing web of resistance. As the last light faded, they clasped hands in silent prayer, 3 unlikely allies united against corruption, their hearts beating with equal measures of hope and fear for the week ahead. Dawn painted the hills in watercolor hues as Elias made his way on Pine Hollow's main street. His ribs still ached, but the familiar weight of his carpenter's tools brought comfort. He'd promised Martha he'd check the cabin's defenses before heading to the timber camp. Movement caught his eye. 2 of Creedy's men lounged against the general store's wall, their attention fixed on Clara walking to Anita's shop. The men exchanged knowing looks before casually following the girl at a distance. Elias's hands tightened on his tool belt. Inside the weaving shop, Clara sat down for her morning lesson, just as Elias burst through the door. Anita rose quickly, reading the concern on his face. "Mrs. Yazzie, would you keep Clara here while I fetch her mother?" His voice was low but urgent. "Of course." Anita's dark eyes narrowed. I saw them too. Martha was hanging laundry when Elias approached her yard. "They're watching Clara," he said without preamble. "Creedy's men, following her through town." The sheet in Martha's hands trembled. "But she's just a child." "Creedy's showing us he can reach what we care about most." Elias pulled a hammer from his belt. "I'm staying today. Cabin needs work." Martha started to protest, but Elias held up his hand. "Can't work timber with these ribs anyhow. Better to make sure you're safe." Throughout the morning, the sounds of Elias's labor echoed across the yard. He replaced loose boards, reinforced window frames, and mended the sagging porch. His movements were careful but determined, each nail driven with purpose. Townsfolk passed by throughout the day, their reactions split like a creek around a stone. Some nodded in approval, offering quiet words of support. Others hurried past with averted eyes, fear of the railroad's power evident in their hurried steps. "Heard what happened at the county office," old Mrs. Peterson whispered as she brought Martha a jar of preserved peaches. "About time someone stood up to that snake, Creedy." But the baker's wife hustled her children to the other side of the street, calling out, "Don't you worry about losing your business when the railroad pulls out?" By afternoon, Elias had moved to the fence line, replacing rotted posts and tightening wire. Martha brought him water in a tin cup, watching as he tested each repair. "You don't have to do all this," she said softly. Elias wiped sweat from his brow. "Yes, Mum, I do." He gestured to the strengthened fence. "Ain't just wood and wire now. It's a message. Shows we ain't backing down." As sunset approached, quiet figures began slipping into Martha's yard. Reverend Dunbar arrived first, followed by Anita and Clara. Then came the Williams family from the farm next door, and the Cooper sisters who ran the dressmaker's shop. Each carried a dish of food and determination in their eyes. They gathered in Martha's front room, heads bowed as Reverend Dunbar led them in prayer. "Lord," he intoned, "guide us in our pursuit of justice. Give us courage to stand firm against those who would prey upon the vulnerable." After the prayer, they spoke in hushed voices about their plan. Anita spread the fraudulent documents on Martha's table, while Mrs. Williams revealed similar papers from her own property dispute. "Sheriff Kellard's a fair man," Reverend Dunbar assured them, "but he needs solid evidence before he'll move against Creedy. We'll present everything tomorrow. The railroad's been trying to buy up all the land along the creek." Mr. Cooper added, "They're planning something big, mark my words." Clara served coffee to the adults, careful not to spill as she moved between them. The lamplight cast warm shadows on the walls, making the gathering feel almost festive despite its serious purpose. As the evening wound down, the visitors departed one by one, slipping away as quietly as they'd come. Elias made one final check of the property before heading to his camp bed in the barn. The night settled deep and still around the cabin. Martha tucked Clara into bed, smoothing her daughter's hair as she drifted off to sleep. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight had shown they weren't alone. The peace shattered at dawn with Clara's terrified scream. Martha ran to the front door, Elias appearing from the barn at the same instant. Clara stood frozen on the porch, staring at the gruesome sight before her. A crow nailed to the door, its wings spread wide, dark blood staining the fresh-painted wood. Elias quickly moved Clara away while Martha fought back nausea. The message was clear. Creedy's patience had run out. "Get inside," Elias said quietly, already reaching for the dead bird. "I'll take care of this." Martha gathered Clara close, feeling her daughter's shoulders shake. Through the window, she watched Elias remove the crow with gentle hands, his face set in grim lines. The morning sun caught the fresh blood on their door, a stark reminder of what they faced. But as Clara's trembling subsided, Martha remembered the previous night's gathering. The prayers, the shared purpose, the quiet strength of neighbors standing together. Creedy might have his threats, but they had something stronger, a community finding its courage, one person at a time. The morning sun had barely touched the mountain peaks when Elias appeared at Martha's door. His broad shoulders cast a protective shadow as Clara stepped out onto the porch, her small satchel of sewing supplies clutched close. "Morning, Miss Clara." He tipped his hat, earning a shy smile. "Shall we head to Mrs. Yazzy's shop?" They walked side by side down Pine Hollow's dusty main street, Elias matching his long stride to Clara's shorter steps. His eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, noting every movement in doorways and alleyways. Back at the cabin, Martha spread the documents across her kitchen table. Her fingers traced the altered boundaries and missing signatures, carefully copying each detail onto fresh paper. The morning light streaming through the window illuminated suspicious ink changes and hastily amended dates. A commotion erupted outside just before noon. Elias's angry shout carried across the street to where Martha stood at Anita's shop door. He stood in the livery stable doorway, holding the remains of his mule's slashed harness, the leather straps hanging in useless ribbons. "Third time this week," he said grimly when Martha approached. "Creedy's men are getting bolder." The afternoon brought worse trouble. Smoke rose from behind Anita's weaving shop, thick and black against the clear sky. Elias spotted it first from where he was repairing his harness. He sprinted across the street, water bucket in hand, just as flames began licking up the shop's back wall. "Clara! Anita!" His voice boomed through the building. They emerged coughing but unharmed as Elias doused the flames. Anita's face was tight with anger as she surveyed the scorched wall. "They waited until my customers left," she said. "Cowards." Clara helped gather scattered weaving materials, while Martha and Anita salvaged what they could. The smell of smoke clung to everything, a harsh reminder of how far Creedy would go to drive them out. "You'll stay with us tonight," Martha told Anita firmly. "It's not safe here alone." The women worked late into the evening, organizing their evidence for the sheriff. Clara fell asleep on a pile of blankets, while Anita taught Martha to recognize various official seals and signatures. A horse's hoofbeats broke the night's silence. Martha reached for the rifle by the door, but the rider was already gone. Only a leather packet remained on the porch steps, tied with faded red string. Elias emerged from the barn where he'd been sleeping, scanning the darkness. "Whoever it was, they knew these trails. Didn't make a sound until they wanted us to hear." Inside, Martha untied the packet with trembling fingers. Yellowed maps spilled across the table, their corners worn soft with age. Anita leaned forward, her breath catching as she studied the careful lines and notations. "These are survey maps," she said, voice hushed with recognition. "Look here. This is your homestead, Martha. And these marks—" Her finger traced a series of boundaries. "This shows your land lies within protected Navajo territory. The bank has no right to claim it." Martha stared at the maps, hope rising in her chest. "But how can we be sure these are real?" Anita pointed to a small mark in the corner, a distinctive signature half hidden by the map's fold. "My husband made these maps 15 years ago when he worked for the agency. I'd know his mark anywhere." Her dark eyes shone with certainty. "These are official survey documents. They prove Creedy's claim is fraudulent." Elias studied the maps over their shoulders, his presence solid and reassuring. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "Creedy can't fight against federal Indian Territory laws. No wonder he was so desperate to push us out quickly," Martha said. "He knew the truth was out there in these maps." Clara stirred on her blankets, blinking sleepily at the adults gathered around the table. "Did the good men win?" she murmured. Martha smoothed her daughter's hair. "Not yet, sweetheart, but we're closer now." Anita carefully rolled the maps, securing them with the red string. "We'll take these to the sheriff first thing tomorrow, with these and the forged deed copies." She met Martha's eyes. "We have him, my friend." They worked through the night, making detailed notes about each map's significance. Elias kept watch from the porch, his silhouette a constant guardian against the darkness. The lamp burned low as they prepared to face whatever morning would bring. The maps lay between them like a promise, proof that justice sometimes came from unexpected sources, delivered by unknown allies in the dead of night. Tomorrow would be time enough for confrontations. Tonight, they had hope. The first light of dawn painted Pine Hollow's little white church in soft grey. Martha pulled her shawl tighter as she climbed the worn wooden steps, the precious maps secured beneath her dress. Inside, oil lamps cast flickering shadows on the rough-hewn pews where Elias, Anita, and Reverend Dunbar waited. "Did anyone see you come?" Reverend Dunbar whispered, his weathered face creased with concern. Martha shook her head. "The streets were empty. Clara's safe with Mrs. Peterson." They gathered near the altar, spreading the maps and deed copies across a small table. Anita's fingers traced the boundary lines with practiced care, explaining each mark and seal to the others. The morning light strengthened, streaming through dusty windows to illuminate their evidence. "These survey markers are clear as day," Anita said, her voice steady. "The homestead sits on protected land. My husband's signature here proves these are official agency documents." Reverend Dunbar adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles, studying the forged deeds. "The alterations are obvious when you know where to look. Dates scratched out, signatures that don't match the originals." "Sheriff Kellard needs to see this," Elias said quietly. His massive frame seemed out of place among the delicate church furnishings, but his presence brought them comfort. As if summoned by his name, bootsteps creaked on the church porch. Sheriff Kellard entered, removing his hat. His badge caught the lamplight as he approached their makeshift war council. "Show me what you've found," he said, voice low and grave. They laid out their case: the maps, the forged documents, the pattern of intimidation. The sheriff's face grew more troubled with each piece of evidence. "This is solid proof of fraud," he admitted, running a hand through his graying hair. "But Creedy's got friends in high places. The railroad company's been buying up judges all across the territory." Martha's heart sank, but she lifted her chin. "So, you won't help us?" "Didn't say that." Sheriff Kellard sighed heavily. "When the circuit judge arrives next week, I'll escort you all to present your case. But until then, watch your backs. Railroad men play rough when their profits are threatened." "Much obliged, Sheriff," Elias said, standing straight despite his exhaustion. "I'd best get to the timber camp. Creedy's men will be wondering where I am." Martha touched his arm. "Be careful. If they suspect anything, they won't." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Far as they know, I'm just another broken workhorse, too tired to cause trouble." They watched through the church windows as Elias trudged toward the timber camp, his shoulders deliberately slumped, his steps heavy with manufactured weariness. The performance was convincing, a man defeated by endless labor. "He's protecting us all," Anita observed softly, drawing their attention to keep them from looking too closely at what we're doing. Sheriff Kellard nodded grimly. "Keep those documents safe until the judge arrives. I'll do what I can to keep Creedy's thugs occupied, but stay alert." After the sheriff left, Reverend Dunbar led them in a quiet prayer. Martha barely heard the words, her mind racing with plans and fears. When they finally emerged from the church, the sun had climbed high enough to chase away the morning shadows. Back home, Martha sat at her kitchen table, carefully stitching a small leather pouch. Her needle moved steadily through the soft material as she created a hidden compartment that would rest beneath her clothes. The maps and deeds would stay close to her heart, safe from prying eyes. Clara watched from her seat by the window, where she was supposed to be practicing her letters. "Is that for the special papers, Mama?" "Yes, sweetheart." Martha tied off her thread. "Sometimes the most important things need to be kept close and quiet." She slipped the documents into the pouch, testing how it lay flat and invisible beneath her dress. The weight of the papers against her skin felt like a shield, proof that justice was possible, even in these harsh territories. Through the window, she could see Elias in the distance, his axe rising and falling as he worked in Creedy's timber camp. He moved slower than usual, playing his part, but she knew his strength remained unbroken. Like the maps hidden against her heart, some truths couldn't be erased by lies or threats. The pouch was finished. Now they just had to hold on until the judge arrived, keeping their hope and their evidence safe in the dangerous days ahead. 2 days passed like molasses in winter, thick with tension but outwardly calm. Martha kept to her washing routine, hanging sheets in the yard while watching the road. Clara spent her mornings at Anita's shop, learning to card wool and count in Navajo. Elias split his time between Creedy's timber camp and checking the perimeter of the Ellsworth property, his watchful eyes never far from their door. The evening sun cast long shadows across Martha's small kitchen when she stepped out to fetch water from the well. Clara sat at the table, practicing her letters while humming a hymn from Sunday service. The familiar rhythm of their days had almost made them forget the danger lurking beyond their fence. "I'll be right back, sweetheart," Martha said, picking up the wooden bucket. "Keep working on those letters." "Yes, Mama." Clara's pencil scratched against paper, her tongue poking out in concentration. The well stood 30 paces from the cabin. Martha had barely lowered the bucket when she heard the muffled scream. The rope slipped through her fingers as she ran, her heart thundering against her ribs. The kitchen door swung open on broken hinges. Clara was gone. Boot prints marked the wooden floor. A piece of paper lay on the table, held down by Clara's abandoned pencil. Martha's hands shook as she read the crude writing, "Bring all papers and maps to Creedy by sundown tomorrow. Leave Pine Hollow forever, or the girl gets sold north where you'll never find her. No law involved, or she disappears faster." Martha's scream brought Elias running from the timber camp. He burst through the door, saw the note in her trembling hands, and his face turned to stone. Without a word, he crossed to the cabin's corner where he kept his gear. His movements were precise, controlled, but Martha saw the rage burning in his eyes as he checked his rifle and gathered supplies. "They'll take the mountain pass," he said, his voice low and deadly calm. "It's the only way north that won't cross railroad territory." "I'm coming with you," Anita declared from the doorway. No one had heard her arrive. She stood straight-backed, her dark eyes fierce. "I know every trail through those mountains. My people have used them for generations." Elias paused in his preparations, studying her face. "It'll be dangerous." "So is letting them take that child." Anita's tone left no room for argument. "Besides, you'll need someone who can read the land at night. The moon is new, and they'll travel in darkness." Martha clutched the ransom note to her chest. "I should come too." "No," Elias and Anita said together. "Stay here," Elias continued more gently. "If they're watching the cabin, they need to see you keeping normal hours, and someone has to be here when we bring Clara back." The way he said when, not if, steadied Martha's racing heart. She nodded, then hurried to pack them food, while Elias readied 2 horses. Anita disappeared briefly, returning with her own mount and a leather bag of medicines and supplies. Within 20 minutes, they were ready. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the mountains in deep purple shadows. Elias checked his saddle straps one final time, his movements efficient but unhurried. Martha recognized the calm that settled over him, the focus of a man who had found his purpose. "How will you find them in the dark?" she whispered. "They're driving hard with a frightened child." Anita answered, securing her bag. "They'll leave signs, even at night. Broken branches, disturbed stones, maybe even pieces of Clara's dress if she's clever enough to leave us a trail." "She's clever," Elias said with quiet certainty. "And she's brave. She knows we're coming." Martha pressed a small bundle of cornbread into his hands. "Bring her home." "I swore to protect her." Elias's voice carried the weight of his oath. "That hasn't changed." They mounted up, Elias's horse stamping with nervous energy. Anita pointed toward a narrow trail that wound up into the darkening mountains. "We'll take the old trading path. It runs parallel to the main pass but higher up. We can watch their progress without being seen." Martha stood in her doorway, watching them disappear into the gathering dusk. The last thing she saw was Elias's broad shoulders, straight and sure in the saddle, following Anita's lead toward the mountain paths. Their horses' hoofbeats faded into the evening quiet, leaving Martha alone with her prayers and her fierce belief in the man who had become their protector. In the distance, a coyote called out, a lonely sound that echoed off the mountainsides. But to Martha, it felt like a promise, like the wild itself was rising up to help bring her daughter home. Moonless darkness wrapped around Elias and Anita as they guided their horses along narrow mountain trails. Only starlight filtered through the pine branches overhead, casting weak shadows on the rocky path. Anita rode slightly ahead, her body swaying in perfect rhythm with her horse's careful steps. "Here," she whispered, reining to a stop. The main pass runs below us, through that ravine. She gestured toward a deeper darkness between the slopes. We can follow this ridge trail parallel to them. The old ones used it to watch for raiders. Elias nodded, though his heart ached at their slow pace. Every minute felt like an eternity with Clara in danger, but he trusted Anita's wisdom. Rushing blindly would only alert the kidnappers to their pursuit. Look there. Anita pointed to a thorny bush beside the trail. A piece of blue ribbon fluttered in the night breeze, caught on sharp thorns. Elias recognized it immediately. Clara had worn it in her hair that morning. "That's my girl," he murmured, pride mixing with worry. "She's leaving us signs." "She has a warrior's spirit," Anita said softly, "like her mother." They pressed on through the night, Anita reading the land like a well-worn book. She pointed out disturbed stones, broken twigs, and other subtle signs of recent passage below. Twice they had to dismount and lead the horses across treacherous scree slopes, the loose rock threatening to betray their position with any misstep. Back in Pine Hollow, Martha moved with quiet purpose through the sleeping town. She knocked on doors of trusted neighbors, speaking in hushed tones about what needed to be done. By midnight, a network of support had formed, men ready to ride at dawn's first light, women preparing food and medical supplies. At the telegraph office, Reverend Dunbar worked by lamplight, carefully composing his message to the federal judge. His fingers moved deliberately across the paper as he drafted, "Urgent stop child kidnapped in land dispute. Stop evidence of fraud and treaty violations requires immediate attention. Stop arrive soonest possible stop." The telegraph operator, roused from his bed by the Reverend's insistent knocking, promised to send it first thing in the morning. "The lines don't run at night," he explained apologetically. "But it'll be the first message through at sunrise." In the mountains, Elias and Anita made steady progress. The night air grew colder as they climbed higher, their breath forming small clouds in the starlight. Anita shared her water skin and dried meat, insisting they keep up their strength. "The kidnappers will rest soon," she said, studying the sky. "They can't risk their horses on these trails in full dark, and they'll want to be fresh for crossing the territorial line tomorrow." As if confirming her words, they spotted a flicker of light in a sheltered ravine below. Elias immediately tensed, but Anita laid a restraining hand on his arm. "Wait," she cautioned. "Let's make sure it's them first, and we need to know exactly where Clara is before we move." They tied their horses in a protected hollow and crept forward on foot. The pre-dawn air was absolutely still, carrying sounds clearly up from below. Elias's jaw clenched as he heard rough male laughter drift up from the campfire. Positioning themselves behind a cluster of boulders, they studied the camp below. 3 men sat around a small fire, passing a bottle between them. A 4th stood guard at the ravine's entrance, rifle across his knees. And there, wrapped in a blanket near the fire, lay Clara. Even from this distance, Elias could see she was bound hand and foot. The eastern sky began to lighten, the first pale grey of dawn seeping into the stars. In Pine Hollow, Martha stood on her porch, watching that same dawn creep over the mountains. Behind her, lanterns bobbed in windows throughout town as people rose early, preparing for whatever the day might bring. Reverend Dunbar joined her, his telegram clutched in his hand. "The office opens in 10 minutes," he said quietly. "God willing, the judge will receive it by noon." Martha nodded, her eyes never leaving the mountain peaks. "Clara's up there somewhere," she whispered, "and Elias is coming for her. We just have to be ready when they return." "The town's with you, Martha," the Reverend assured her. "More than you know. People are tired of living under Creedy's shadow. Sometimes it just takes one brave soul to help others find their courage." In the ravine, Elias and Anita withdrew slightly from their observation point to confer. The growing light revealed more details of the terrain, the steep walls of the ravine, the single trail leading out, the loose scree slopes above the camp. "We have maybe an hour before they break camp," Anita murmured. "They'll want to cross the territorial line by midday." She studied Elias's face in the grey dawn light. "What's your plan?" Elias checked his rifle one more time, his movements calm and deliberate. The rage that had driven him through the night had crystallized into something harder, more focused. He looked at the lightening sky, then back at Clara's small form by the dying fire. Dawn was breaking, and with it, the time for action had come. The first rays of sunlight painted the ravine in golden hues as Elias positioned himself above the camp. He had sent Anita to circle around the far side, where loose rocks waited on the steep slope. His plan was simple but effective. Create chaos, then strike. At his signal, Anita dislodged a cascade of stones that clattered down the ravine wall. The guards jumped to their feet, weapons turning toward the distraction. That was all Elias needed. He launched himself down the slope, his massive frame carrying the momentum of a charging bull. The first kidnapper went down before he could raise his rifle. The second managed to fire once, the shot going wild as Elias barreled into him. The guard by Clara scrambled for his pistol, but Anita's second rock slide sent him stumbling away from the girl. Only the foreman kept his head. He darted to Clara's side, pressing a revolver against her temple. "Stop right there, Brant!" he shouted. "One more step and she dies." Elias froze, his chest heaving. 20 feet separated him from Clara, whose eyes were wide but steady. She didn't cry or struggle, just watched him with complete trust. "You ain't gonna shoot her," Elias said, his voice low and certain. "Creedy needs her alive for leverage." The foreman's hand trembled slightly. "Don't test me, mountain man. I'll do what needs doing." "No." Elias straightened to his full height, hands open at his sides. "You won't, because you ain't evil, just weak. Following orders don't make you right." Something flickered in the foreman's eyes. Doubt, shame, or both. Clara chose that moment to speak up, her clear voice cutting through the tension. "Mr. Elias says good men always have a choice." The foreman's grip loosened, just slightly. It was enough. Elias crossed the space between them in 2 massive strides. His hand closed around the revolver, twisting it away with careful strength. He could have broken the man's wrist, could have struck him down with righteous fury. Instead, he simply disarmed him, letting the foreman stumble backward. "I ain't gonna kill you," Elias said quietly. "That ain't who I am. That ain't who Clara believes I am." The morning stillness was broken by hoofbeats. Sheriff Kellard rode into the ravine, leading a dozen townsmen, including Reverend Dunbar. They found Elias kneeling beside Clara, gently untying her bonds, while Anita kept watch over the subdued kidnappers. "Got word from the Miller boy," the sheriff explained, dismounting. "Saw them take her and rode straight to town. We've been following your trail since midnight." He surveyed the scene, noting the lack of bloodshed. "Reckon you showed more mercy than most would have, Brant." Elias didn't respond. He was focused on Clara, checking her for injuries. Finding only rope burns and scratches, he wrapped her in his coat and lifted her into his arms. She curled against his chest like a small bird seeking shelter. "Thank you for coming for me," she whispered. "Always will, little one," he answered, his gruff voice gentle. "That's a promise." The sheriff and his men secured the kidnappers, binding them for the ride back to town. Reverend Dunbar approached Elias, leading his horse. "The town's waiting," the preacher said. "Martha's been up all night, rallying support. Folks are starting to see things different now, seeing you different." Elias mounted carefully, keeping Clara secure in front of him. Anita rode beside them as they started down the mountain, the morning mist wreathing the pines in white. The posse followed with their prisoners, the sound of many horses creating a steady rhythm on the trail. Clara dozed against Elias's chest as they descended, exhausted but safe. He kept one arm wrapped protectively around her, his other hand steady on the reins. The sun climbed higher, burning away the mist and warming the cool mountain air. "You chose a harder path," Anita observed quietly. "Many would say those men deserved worse." "Maybe," Elias agreed. "But violence breeds violence. Clara deserves better than that legacy." They emerged from the mountain paths into rolling foothills. Pine Hollow lay ahead in the valley, smoke rising from morning cook fires. Word of their approach must have spread, because people lined the main street as they rode in. Martha burst from the crowd as they reached the town square. Elias dismounted smoothly, still cradling Clara, and placed her gently in her mother's arms. The two held each other tight, tears flowing freely. The gathered townsfolk watched in respectful silence as the sheriff led the prisoners toward the jail. But when Elias turned to leave, Clara's voice rang out clear and strong. "Don't go, Mr. Elias. Please stay." He paused, uncertainty crossing his weathered face. Then Martha reached out and caught his rough hand in hers. "She's right," Martha said. "You're family now. Stay." The morning sun painted the scene in warm light. The reunited mother and daughter, the towering mountain man with his head bowed in acceptance, and the community gathering closer, offering silent support. Something had shifted in Pine Hollow, as sure as the changing of seasons. Where once stood a solitary man bound by duty, now stood a protector welcomed by choice. The afternoon sun blazed overhead as Pine Hollow's residents crowded into the courthouse. Judge Harrison, a silver-haired man with keen eyes, sat behind the massive oak bench, reviewing the evidence spread before him. Martha stood straight-backed as she testified, her voice clear and steady. She detailed the impossible terms of the loan, the threats against Clara, and the discovery of the altered documents. Anita followed, explaining the boundary map's significance with quiet authority, her knowledge of tribal treaties lending weight to each word. Elias's testimony was brief but powerful. "I swore to work forever," he said, his deep voice carrying to every corner. "But I won't honor a contract built on lies." Sheriff Kellard presented the evidence from Clara's kidnapping, laying out how Creedy's men had tried to silence the truth through violence. The judge's expression grew darker with each revelation. "The evidence before this court is overwhelming," Judge Harrison declared, rising to his feet. "The fraud perpetrated by Jasper Creedy and his associates represents a grievous abuse of public trust." The judge's gavel cracked like thunder as he issued his ruling. Creedy's property was seized, the labor contract binding Elias declared void, and the bank's licenses revoked. But he wasn't finished. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I order that all remaining bank assets be distributed among the families who suffered under this scheme. Justice demands not only punishment, but restoration." The crowd spilled into the town square, where a metal barrel had been placed. Judge Harrison held up the stack of fraudulent documents, letting everyone see the false papers that had caused so much pain. "Let this serve as a reminder," he announced, dropping the first document into the barrel. A match flared, and flames began to consume the papers. One by one, families stepped forward to add their own voided contracts to the fire. Martha and Clara approached together, Elias at their side. As Martha cast Creedy's threats into the flames, Clara slipped her small hand into Elias's calloused one. The townspeople watched in solemn silence as years of lies and manipulation turned to ash. The autumn wind carried sparks skyward, and with them, the heavy burden of injustice that had weighed on Pine Hollow for so long. In the days that followed the courthouse victory, Pine Hollow shed its shroud of fear like winter giving way to spring. The town settled into a gentler rhythm, one marked by honest work and neighborly kindness. Elias stood in front of a weathered building on Main Street, key in hand. The wooden sign above read, "Brant's Carpentry." His saved earnings from years of solitary work had finally found their purpose. Inside, sawdust caught the morning light streaming through newly cleaned windows. His workbench, lovingly restored, waited for the first commission. At the town's communal laundry, Martha hung fresh sheets that snapped in the autumn breeze. The town council had appointed her as manager, recognizing her skill with books and her steadfast character. Women gathered here now, sharing stories as they worked, their laughter rising above the splash of washboards and the creak of the mangle. Anita's weaving shop flourished as word spread of her craft. Traders from 3 territories now stopped to admire her intricate designs. She taught local women traditional patterns, weaving together more than just wool. She wove understanding between cultures, one lesson at a time. Clara bloomed like a wildflower in spring. Gone were the shadows under her eyes, replaced by the sparkle of security. She spent her afternoons between Anita's loom and her mother's laundry, her quick hands learning both trades. But her greatest joy came in creating something special for Elias. One evening, as shadows lengthened across the Ellsworth cabin's porch, Clara presented Elias with a carefully wrapped package. Inside lay a scarf, the wool soft and warm. Embroidered in neat stitches were the words, "Family is forever." Elias ran his rough fingers over the letters, his throat tight with emotion. That night, they gathered around the Ellsworth table, Martha, Clara, Elias, and Anita. The cabin glowed with lamplight and contentment. Steam rose from bowls of hearty stew, and fresh bread filled the air with its homey scent. Their laughter mixed with the clink of spoons and the soft murmur of easy conversation. Clara's voice rang out clear and happy as she told a story from school. Martha's eyes met Elias's across the table, sharing a look of quiet joy. Anita added her own gentle wisdom to the talk, her presence completing their circle of chosen family. The cabin, once heavy with worry, now held the warmth of belonging. These walls that had witnessed so many tears now echoed with the sound of healing hearts and newfound peace. Spring painted Pine Hollow in tender greens and soft wildflower blooms. On the Ellsworth homestead, a new house rose from fresh-cut timber, its sturdy frame reaching toward clear blue skies. Elias worked from sunrise to sunset, each nail and beam placed with careful precision. The house grew larger than the old cabin, with wide windows to welcome morning light, and a special room where Anita's loom would sing its rhythmic song. Martha walked the property's edge, checking the young pea shoots and early lettuce sprouting in neat rows. The garden spread like a patchwork quilt beneath her care, promising summer bounty. She paused often to watch Elias work, her heart full at the sight of him building their future with his own hands. Townsfolk came in ones and twos, bringing food and helping hands. They remembered how justice had bloomed from this family's courage, how their stand against Creedy had freed many from similar bonds. They worked alongside Elias, raising walls and setting floors, their labor a testament to gratitude. When the house stood complete, Reverend Dunbar gathered everyone for a blessing. His voice carried across the spring breeze as he thanked the Lord for bringing light from darkness, family from loneliness. Anita stood beside Martha, her dark eyes bright with joy as she watched Clara weave between the guests, offering cups of fresh well water. Inside the new home's workshop, Elias sat with Clara at his workbench. His large hands guided her smaller ones as they carved a wooden horse from pine. Shavings curled around their feet like pale ribbons while he taught her about grain and pressure, about finding the shape waiting inside each piece of wood. "Like this?" Clara asked, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. "Just so," Elias answered, his voice gentle. Through the window he could see Martha in her garden, her bonnet bright against the dark soil. The sight filled his chest with warmth. He remembered the man he'd been, solitary, silent, bearing his burdens alone. Now each morning brought Clara's laughter, Martha's quiet strength, Anita's wisdom. His vow to work forever had transformed into something precious, not a chain of debt, but the golden threads of love that bound them together, chosen and cherished. The wooden horse took shape beneath their hands as the sun painted the workshop in amber light. Outside, Martha's garden bloomed, and the new house stood proud against the spring sky, a testament to promises kept and love freely given. Thank you for watching. If this one reached you, consider subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow with more meaning, more humanity.